Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, as you can tell from the title up there. Continuing my trek through Everybody Loves Raymond, one episode and one season at a time. We're on episode 19 of season 8. We only got a couple more episodes, and then we are in the home stretch. We'll be in the final season. Just feels like a little, the closer we get. Once we get to the last 5 episodes, like, ooh. Now, this is called The Nice Talk. This is one that was written by Steve Scroven, one of the writers who's written a lot of episodes in this show. And this is an episode where Ray has a heart-to-heart conversation. Now, it's not with his wife, it's not with his brother, it's not with either of his parents, nor is it with any of his in-laws or children. Heck, it's not even with freaking Peter. It is with Patricia McDougal, Robert's mother-in-law. And just from the little brief description I've set the scene of, if you know these characters, you already know where the comedy is going to come from. Now, this is an Easter episode. Everybody is at the Barone residence for it, between the two houses. And, you know, they're all getting used to each other still a little bit, but compared to how they were at the end of last season, everybody's a little bit more acclimated to everything. More of the little ribbing and poking at each other is more good-natured here. And you can see that it looks like the characters are going to have a nice little Easter. They do make their comments. The one that kind of stands out is when they mention where they're going to go for church. Like Hank and Pat are like, hey, where's a good Presbyterian church? And then it's brought up like, hey, maybe you should come to the Catholic Church with us. And like, oh, well. And there's some little good humor there, especially with Frank and Peter Boyle, of course. Master deliverer, even at this point in his career with his health and all that. Now, in order to pass the evening along, they are going to break out a puzzle. Now, it intended to be a religious puzzle, but Patricia finds out it is one of Peter's heavy metal puzzles. And you can already guess with how overly religious Hank and Pat are, that even a more PG to G rated metal poster is going to be giving them the, oh no, look. They spend the evening putting the puzzle together, and then at the very end it's just Ray and Patricia that are sitting up, and they start talking. And what gets the two talking, other than like brief little things, is that Ray points out, hey, you got a good eye for the puzzle there. And it just keeps going until Patricia mentions that she reads Ray's column, which, from how we've seen Ray is in the past, we know he's going to enjoy that, mainly because most of his family do not read his column on any regular basis. It's been brought up multiple times. Like, Debra herself even mentioned before, like, hey, when we were dating, yeah. And of course, Marie is her usual, that's always about sports. It's a sports column, Marie. They get to talking about family, and certain things are brought up. My favorite little thing that's brought up is that we find out that Hank is actually a teacher, which, with how we've seen him, mainly on the edge of being someone who is intolerant of other people's faiths and all that, it's like, oh god, I hate to imagine how he was as a teacher. Now that's more me thinking about it through a modern lens. Maybe back in the early 2000s, maybe not as much of a big deal, or when he was a younger man in the 80s and into the 90s, maybe wouldn't have been as big a deal, especially in Pennsylvania. But then again, I could be just hoping it wasn't that big of a deal. But it never dives into that. It's more about stories from the teacher's lounge. Now, one by one, each of the Browns find out that Ray and Patricia had that little heart-to-heart talk while putting the puzzle together, and each of them reacts the way you would expect. At first, Debra is all nice and all that, and she suggests, hey, maybe we should have a heart-to-heart with my mother like that. Robert, it's his usual thing, like, well, not enough parents in the world, Ray? Of course, once Marie finds out, it's her usual jealous mama bear thing, like, really, Ray? I'm your mother, you should be doing this with me. Now, Peter, he seems to be like, to it until he finds out what puzzle it was. Then he does a little spin out of the hammock he's laying in, which, according to IMDb, that is a tribute to something that the late John Ritter used to do on Three's Company. And considering who we got playing the parents in there, even though I don't think they were involved with that show, you already got a sitcom connection there. Just throwing another one for good measure. Nice little reference there. You know, they always say about the whole thing about imitation, sincere form of flattery and all. And this all leads into the last part of the episode where everybody is essentially ganging up on Ray and Pat for having the talk. Ray is going like, "Hey, this is not cool. Why are we doing this? This is not cool. You guys shouldn't be doing this." And Patricia eventually decides to side with everyone else and be like, "You know, maybe we shouldn't do the conversation." And Ray, of course, is trying to really stand up for them being able to talk like that, and eventually backs down. And there's not really much else for me to say about this episode. I mean, while it's a fun episode to watch, it is kind of a one-note episode, for lack of a better way to describe it. I mean, it has a lot of fun moments in there, and it does carry along quite a clip, and all the characters react the way we would, so it's an episode that essentially writes itself. But it definitely is one that was just thrown in there for filler length, which I know a lot of times in sitcoms we can say that, but when you're looking at the episodes and you're looking at the titles, this one definitely feels like a filler one, and I'm thinking that's why this one has never really been on the rewatch list, because other than the general premise before I went and watched it, I could not tell you one thing about this episode. And I could say it's definitely going to be on the most likely skip list in the foreseeable future. I don't hate it, I did enjoy it, but there's just not really much about it where I could see myself watching it repeatedly. Which that's probably the main issue with a lot of the episodes in these last 2 seasons that I don't see myself rewatching. It's that they're fun, but they just don't have the same resonance with me as like some of the ones that you can take or leave in the earlier season. Part of that might be that I've watched those earlier seasons a lot more. Maybe if I decide to marathon watch these last 2 seasons back to back a lot, just to see how I feel about the episodes I don't really remember a lot of, maybe that might change. But just watching it in a vacuum, it seems more like the time of when it was made and everything. Like if this episode had been made a couple seasons earlier and it was a different person he was doing with, definitely would not have had the same thing. I think it's the freshness factor of the McDougalls still at this point that make this one not fail, but is not as fun. Oh, webtoons. Huh. And not really much else to say about this episode. Now the next one, I can definitely tell I remember a little bit more than the general premise. I remember a little bit about it. And that's because this is an episode that, as you've heard me say a lot of times before, could be made anytime, but making it at this point gives you one more character to work off of in a more intimate fashion, and that, of course, is Blabbermouths. And that is going to be next time. Till then.